Welcome to 7 Investing Now, a show that teaches you how to take a long-term view on investing by better understanding what's happening in the market now.
Good afternoon, 7 investors, and welcome to a special edition of 7 Investing Now. We're going to be talking the last and biggest biotech conference of the year with Manisha, Samy, and Max Chatsko. But before we get to that, I want to do a couple of things. Max, I'm moving. You're moving. I have an idea for a company. I want to disrupt the logistics of moving. We're having similar issues. I don't have keys. I don't have access to the gate where I'm getting in. You're having a delivery come up and you don't even know how to get into your building. Max, what is going on here?
Yeah, Dan, I don't know. I think we need to solve this logistics issue, but I don't even have keys. There's 3 doors to my house. I don't have a key for any of them yet. So I don't know. Climbing through a window, I guess. Do you have a ladder? You have a ladder company, right, Dan?
I do. My family owns a ladder company. We could take care of you there. This is one of those scenarios where it sounds minor, but there's so many little pieces of it. Like, we had to apply at our HOA to get approved. And there's no reason we wouldn't be approved, but they send you a letter, and like the text of the letter says like the attachment of your approval, and it's really ominous. And then you just scroll down, and it's like, oh, you're approved. Like, when we went to look at our place right before, after we'd agreed to it, I'd never seen it. So after we'd agreed to rent it, there was a lockbox. And of course, was the lockbox on the door? No, the lockbox was on a hose that was hidden under a bush. These things are complicated. They're ridiculous. I'm absolutely dreading it. But before we get to the ASH conference, let's do a quick check-in on COVID vaccines. Max, Canada has approved the Pfizer vaccine. England is already giving people the Pfizer vaccine. Why has the United States not approved this?
Yeah, I've seen some takes on this. I think most of it's a bit of an overreaction, right? Just to be blunt about it, for the UK's perspective, so all the countries have agreed to get supply of the major vaccine candidates, right? You have the Pfizer BioNTech, you have AstraZeneca and Oxford University, then you have Moderna. So the UK obviously was very big on the Oxford University vaccine because that's where it is. And then they had some data integrity issues, which look like it's going to delay the application for that and the approval process. So I think my read on it is the UK is like, oh crap, we kind of hyped up our vaccine. Let's go get this other one from Pfizer real quick. And so you're like, what are we going to tell our citizens? Oh, we have to wait a couple months because we kind of screwed this up. So it's not really that big of a deal. In the grand scheme of things, we're all going to be getting these vaccines.
Yeah, I feel like approval is inevitable, and once it's approved somewhere in the world, it should probably just be approved here in the US. I know that's not how it works, but I trust England and Canada. Manisha, we're about to move on to talking about the ASH conference, but let's stick with vaccines for a second. We know there's 3 vaccines that have been approved. Are there any others that are close to approval?
Sure. So I think right now, yes, we're going to see a whole slew of vaccines just get approved in the near future. Vaccines are not that difficult to make. I think what we will see is, so some of these other companies that might be later in phase 1 or phase 2 trials. So you have Inovio, you also have Arcturus, also based on the same technology as Moderna. And they're earlier on in the pipeline, but there's no reason that, say a year from now, people are still going to be vaccinated. So I think we should expect some phase 2 clinical trial data from Inovio, probably around March or April. Arcturus is around the same time frame. So I think I'm excited to see what those results are like.
So I'll share a little insider info here tomorrow. I'm getting medically screened for a trial for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And early phase 3 trial results show that 1 dose of that particular vaccine has been effective. They haven't elaborated on the numbers all that much. The test that I'll be screening for is what happens if you take the 1 dose and then get a booster dose 57 days later. Does it last, does it last longer? Does it boost your response? So really interesting stuff coming. So we asked people, be patient, but we asked our audience on Twitter, will you take the COVID-19 vaccine when it's available? We also asked them to not make any political comments in the comments. That didn't go that well. But here's the good news. At least among people who like 7 Investing and follow us, more than half, 51.9% said yes. Only 14.5% said no. And another 24.4% said yes, but not quickly. 9.2% were undecided. Do we think most people are ultimately going to take this vaccine? I'll start with Max.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's easy to say something on Twitter and then do something else when everybody's getting vaccinated. So, of course, we sped this up. We expedited some parts of research and development. That's very unusual, but everything looks safe. If we saw any crazy safety signals in these trials were 40,000, 50,000 people, we would have seen anything that we're really going to see in those trials. So, I mean, they're safe, they're effective, and, I encourage everybody to get their vaccinations.
Me too. I am looking forward to it. I miss travel. We're going to move on to our top story. Manisha, the ASH conference is something I hadn't heard about until, 2 weeks ago when you guys started talking about it. Can you give us a grand overview of what it is? And obviously it was virtual this year, but sort of what it looks like in a normal year?
Sure. So ASH stands for it's the American Society of Hematology. So what we have is a number of companies, universities, they publish their research there. And really, if you think about kind of the space of hematology, so anything that is related to blood disorders, you're going to find it there. And a lot of companies like to actually present there because it's for therapeutics companies. You have your earnings calls, doesn't really mean much. It's really these large, major medical conferences that is the kind of sticking point. And not only that, but it's huge for networking, potential M&A, and then also level setting between companies in terms of whose data looks better, who are the winners and losers. So I think we'll with Max go through some of that.
We are absolutely going to go through the winners and losers. Max, have you been to this conference in person? And if you have, how is this year? Obviously, virtual is different. But, were people trying to make a bigger splash? Was there better production value? Was there anything notably different? I cannot stand the virtual conferences. To me, the in-person is the whole benefit of going to most of these things.
Yeah, Dan, I haven't been to ASH in the past, but I know all of us are eager here at 7 Investing to get out there to conferences and trade shows once things start to kind of return to normal. Maybe the end of next year, 2022, I don't know. What changed this year? I mean, virtual conferences or virtual meetings are one thing when it's, Tom in accounting or something on Wednesday morning. Sorry, Tom in accounting. Science, though, really works best in person, right? There's more discussion, there's more analysis, there's pushback from the community of your peers. So this year we didn't get that. But in reality, I mean, we can make a lot of these presentations and poster presentations virtually. We can post, PDF files in a pinch. That's what we're doing this year, maybe next year as well. So, in the grand scheme of things, not that big of a difference. But as Manisha said, the only thing I can see that's really drastically different would be, a lot less merger and acquisition activity. Because, you want to do that in person and meet people and shake hands and kiss babies. If there's any babies at ASH, I don't know.
I'm guessing they don't allow babies. Most conferences do not allow anyone under 18. We're going to talk winners, then we're going to talk losers. Max, you're going to start first. You wanted to talk Fate Therapeutics. This is a company that has added $3 billion to its market cap since the ASH conference. What do they do, and why did that happen?
Yeah, so I've been talking about ASH. I figured I'd talk about it again as a big winner. It looks like it was probably the biggest winner so far from ASH. So Fate Therapeutics is developing cell therapies. That means we're taking live cells and making those the treatment. So that's what's getting put into your body, and that's what's giving the therapeutic potential and activity. So Fate Therapeutics has a next generation approach to cell therapy. So it's working with different types of cells. It has different advantages in terms of manufacturing. So some of the prior generation cell therapies needed to be harvested from patients and then put in a lab and grown up and extracted and grown up some more, and then sent back to the patient and put back into the patient. That's a very labor-intensive process. There's a lot of steps involved, so it's expensive. and each step adds a source of error potentially where things can go wrong. So Fate Therapeutics has taken allogeneic cells, so that means off the shelf. And off the shelf means you can go in and get this treatment. It's available when you need the treatment, right? We grow it up in a different way with larger manufacturing processes. So it should be maybe 90%, 90% reduction in manufacturing costs relative to prior generation cell therapies. And then again, maybe some different safety signals. And so
it's Max, it's off the shelf versus being like bespoke for me. So it does that make it less effective, or can it be just as effective without being personalized?
Oh yeah, it should be as effective. That shouldn't affect that. It's more of a manufacturing obstacle, but it should help. One of the things we've seen is some of these, the first cell therapies to get up to regulatory, scrutiny. The FDA has been way more scrutinous. Is that a word? I don't know. More scrutiny over these things because it wants to make sure that companies are producing the same product each and every time. And it's really questioned a lot of the data from some of the first movers. So I've written about this before. I'll talk about it some more, I'm sure, in the coming years. But oftentimes, biotech is moving very fast. There's a fast pace of innovation. And oftentimes we see that become a first mover disadvantage. You come into more roadblocks, you encounter things that nobody else has, and you kind of take it on the chin. And then maybe some competitors who are faster, more nimbler, can address some of the things you didn't, come up behind and kind of take the top spot. But so we should talk about Fate's actual results though from
let's get there in a second. I want to remind the people watching, of course, you're watching 7 Investing Now, but we will take your questions as well. So feel free to make comments. We're not entirely sure how that works on different platforms because we're on the show. We're not watching the show. But Max, where are they in the clinical trials? Does this work? And what does that mean for investors?
Right. So the reason that Fate Therapeutics has been a big winner from ASH, right? It's taking a new approach. So prior cell therapies mostly focused on something called CAR T cells. So it's a T cell is a type of immune cell. Fate Therapeutics is mostly focusing its pipeline on something called natural killer cells, NK cells. So these have some inherent advantages over T cells. They can avoid a lot of the side effects that we've seen with T cells. They can be dosed multiple times. They can be engineered differently. So in its ongoing phase 1 trial from one of its pipeline assets, and it has 14 total in the pipeline, so lots of activity. But from the data from ASH, there's only 4 patients that they had in this ongoing trial, but 3 of the 4 responded. 2 of them had a complete response, meaning that they had no evidence of disease after getting dosed. And they even had successful redosing, which was one of the key advantages of this company's approach. So Wall Street and investors are saying, hey, you know what? This company is really onto something, maybe. And, if it does win and this keeps holding up, it has such a big pipeline. And the advantages here are so huge because even from some of the big winners that we're going to talk about in this show right today, they were using T cells, but they still had some side effects. And Fate Therapeutics had no side effects at all among the ones that we commonly see among T cells. So, this huge bump in market cap might be well-deserved, but it is very, very early in the data. So investors need to keep that in mind.
I think early in the data is something we're going to be repeating quite a bit. Let's move on to Manisha. You wanted to talk about, this is a company that's come up before. I know a little bit about what they do. CRISPR Therapeutics. What did they talk about at the ASH conference?
Sure. So this is one of the first time that we received data, or human data of using CRISPR gene editing in patients. So they report data from 2 different clinical trial studies, one for sickle cell disease, the other is beta thalassemia. So usually with sickle cell disease, your blood, rather than kind of being perfectly round, it's sickle shaped. With beta thalassemia, it kind of looks like a square. So not great, a lot of pain associated with both. But we have now received data from 10 patients, which was extremely exciting. So basically, using CRISPR gene editing, they were able to edit the stem cells of these patients, transfuse it back into the patient, and basically, so they had 7 patients where they had beta thalassemia, and after receiving CRISPR Therapeutics drug that was gene edited, they had they no longer needed any blood transfusions. So the longest follow-up was 15 months in sickle cell disease patients. So they dosed 3 people basically after being treated with this drug. They didn't go into the ER, or they didn't have to go to the hospital because they had something called VOC, so vaso-occlusive crises. So it's just severe pain because your blood is getting clogged in your veins, and sounds absolutely terrible. But basically, you have all 10 patients living a normal life after a single dose.
So, Manisha, that's very encouraging. And I'm spending the whole time here nodding along as if I understand any of this. But 10 patients, that's really early in the process, right?
It is. And so that would be the drawback. These are very small sample sizes. We'd expect there to be at least upwards of 30 or so. But when you have a drug that is this life-changing, it's an important, so a lot of times you'll have something called a breakthrough designation by the FDA. And if that happens, that means that this might be commercialized a lot sooner if they were not to get that designation. I think one of the drawbacks of, well, not the drawback, but because of CRISPR Therapeutics' success, you also saw that Bluebird Bio, they had a pullback in their stock prices, and that makes sense because they've been working on a sickle cell gene therapy for a number of years now. And if you have the potential of a one-and-done treatment paradigm, everyone wants just a single treatment, not chronically going in. So I think there's a difference there.
This is really exciting. Just to know that people have been living with really horrible things might be able to have one treatment and have it done. Max, do you want to talk about another treatment for a fairly horrible disease? You want to talk about TG Therapeutics. What do they do, and why should investors care?
Yeah, so I think TG Therapeutics has been another winner from ASH. Maybe not as much in the stock price so far, but TG Therapeutics was also a big winner from ASH last year in 2019. So this company is not working on cell therapy right now. It's working on more traditional biologic drugs, if you will. So the company has something called U2. It's not the band, Dan. Sorry. It's two different.
Yeah, I'm an REM guy, so it doesn't bother me.
All right, there you go. So U2 is just it's 2 different drug compounds. One is a monoclonal antibody, so a protein. The other is a checkpoint inhibitor. And they both start with the letter U, so the company just says, U2. So the company has triple combination data from U2 and chemotherapy in a couple of different liquid tumors, so different blood cancers. And it had amazing results. So 100% response rates, and the complete response rate was 41% for U2 plus chemo. TG Therapeutics also has triple combo data that it showed from U2 and another proprietary compound it's working on, so not chemo. And it had relatively less impressive results than what I just said, but still very impressive compared to the standard of care. So this is an example that, yes, we have cell therapy, we have genetic medicines, right? These things are very innovative. They're changing treatment paradigms all over. Like, investors love these things, right? They're pushing stock prices to crazy levels. But this is an example that, hey, you know what? There's still, monoclonal antibodies. I think they're not as, a lot of pipelines have transitioned to cell therapies, but I think this is a good example that, antibodies are still going to be used, even checkpoint inhibitors, and maybe just used in combinational treatment paradigms like we've seen here. And they have some advantages over cell therapy, right? They are easier to manufacture. They have cleaner safety profiles, I should say. The FDA is a little more comfortable with antibodies compared to cell therapies right now. And also giving it to patients, right? Cell therapies often have to be administered, even if they're off the shelf sometimes, in specialized treatment centers. So, when antibodies don't have as much limitations or obstacles for actually administering it to patients. So they sometimes can match the great results we're seeing from cell therapies. Sometimes they're not quite as good, but the much safer profiles might be an advantage either way.
So, Max, let me jump in, and I'm not going to hold you to this. I mean, yes, we're going to do a show on exactly the date you name, and we'll review what you said, but does this mean, and I'm kidding a little bit, are we 3 years, 5 years, 10 years away from, having much more curable and even eliminating certain types of cancer?
Yeah, I want to be careful, I guess, but I think we will cure specific types of cancer, right? So we talk about like maybe in layman's term, a cure for cancer. Well, that's kind of not very accurate, right? Because there are many different types of cancer. So there's no one cure for cancer. What works in here for ASH, right? This is in blood cancers and blood malignancies. So these are called liquid tumors, very different than like lung cancer, brain cancer, which are solid tumors. So those will use different treatments and different approaches. But yes, I think what we're seeing lately in ASH, and one of the reasons we have a lot of companies with, we're talking here 10 patients, 4 patients, 3 patients. TG Therapeutics had dozens of patients, so it's a little bit further along. But these are still relatively small trials, and some of these companies, are valued at $5 billion or more. So I think we're seeing Wall Street or investors kind of price in, hey, you know what? We might actually be competing for cures in the next, 5 years, 10 years for some of these disorders.
Feel free to get your comments in. We know it's not always easy to do that on every platform. That's something we are working on. I appreciate the person who has submitted some comments, but we're not going to talk about geopolitical issues. We tend to avoid politics. Doesn't make you a lot of friends. Manisha, I know you had 2 more companies you wanted to talk about, and they're not necessarily giant winners. They're not necessarily losers. I'll give you the floor here for a couple minutes.
Sure. So Max talked about Fate Therapeutics. So that's CAR and K cells. So he also mentioned CAR T. So one of the companies that presented at ASH was Allogene. So the management team there is actually quite interesting because they were ex-Kite Pharmaceuticals executives. So the CEO right now was Kite Pharmaceuticals CSO. So Kite was the first company to commercialize a CAR T cell therapy, or the second one. Novartis was the first. So this is really interesting. So going back to allogeneic, Max already mentioned that is kind of off the shelf or donor-derived T cells. And we saw okay results. It wasn't anything mind-blowing. 60% of their patients responded to the therapy. This is indicated for multiple myeloma. And I wouldn't say it's mind-blowing what we've seen previously for autologous, so patient-derived source of T cells. We saw upwards of 80%. This should be enough to get approved. Again, this is still phase 1 studies early on. Nothing needle moving, but I think they're on the right track and something to look out for just because manufacturing is such an issue. So having an allogeneic approach is very interesting.
So you're watching 7 Investing now, and this is, of course, brought to you by 7 Investing. And one of the neatest things about our team is we have Max and Manisha. We have 2 people who can credibly talk about all this biotech. We're not just guessing. We're not just throwing a dart at the hot stock of the moment. When you join, when you give us $17 a month or $170 a year, we give you our best pick each month from each of us. And I'll tell you, the picks that Max and Manisha make, I buy one of their picks each month because I don't understand these companies. I mean, I understand them more because they've explained them to me, but I'd never be able to do this research. So you get access to something like my retail expertise, Max and Manisha's biotech expertise. All the other members of the team have areas they specialize in. It's a diverse team. It's very exciting, but let's get back to the ASH conference. Max, you wanted to talk about one of the big losers of the show, and that would be Trillium Therapeutics.
Yeah, Trillium has been one of these momentum stocks lately, right? It's been up, I think, like 5,000%. It started the year as a micro cap, and then people found it, and you know how that goes, right? It's all over the place now. So they presented some data from ASH, and I actually like how this company talks about its science, right? Because a lot of companies are pretty terrible at science communication. So Trillium Therapeutics says that it is unblocking something called the "don't eat me" signal, which is what cells have, and I'm sure that's exactly how cells communicate, right? So what happens is, some tumor cells can block different immune responses in your body. And if they do that, then your immune system's not going to be very effective and cancer can spread and proliferate. So this company kind of unblocks that. It unshields it, right? So it changes that don't eat me signal into an eat me signal, and then your immune system can be very active against it. So the data it presented at ASH was from one of its compounds, very early data still, but it was kind of underwhelming. It kind of brought some investors back down to earth and hit them with the reality of, how complex biology is. A lot of companies say, oh, we found the one thing, we changed this, and it, everything's back to normal. And oftentimes, you change that one part of some complex biological process, but there's 17 other things that changed in the machinery that's going on, right? Maybe you're not even watching. So the company is still early on. It's still doing dose escalation. So that means, it starts at a very low dose, watches what happens, then it ups the dose. So there's still some room for improvement and still something to watch, but it's going to take a little longer than investors expect. So it's...
So Max, let me jump in. This is kind of illustrates how speculative this space is. And one of the things we talk about with investing here is your hit ratio is not going to be that great a lot of the time. But if you buy, 10 stocks in the space, maybe 2 or 3 of them will be long-term winners. That should more than cover your losers. Is that ratio about right? I mean, this is a risky area to invest in.
No, I disagree with Manisha and I. We should win more than 20% of the time for sure. So that's the thing, like you were saying, it's not just about, I heard of Trillium Therapeutics on Twitter and everybody likes it and it's up 4,000%. Manisha and I do real research into the technical, concepts underlying these platforms. We understand the technology platforms. We look at the competitive space, right? We understand how this might fit into the broader competitive landscape, all these other companies at ASH, right? So I think one of the key trends or things to keep in mind here for investors is we're going to see some companies and they're going to have very innovative approaches and they're going to get very good data, but there's so much competition and there's so much innovation that, good data or great data sometimes, like in the next few years, we're going to see it. There's going to be companies that have great data and it's not going to be enough because someone's going to be just that much better. So the company here, Trillium Therapeutics, using its compound just as a standalone treatment, pretty underwhelming, not very impressive. Only saw 1 complete response out of 17 patients. Again, it's still early. It's still doing dose escalation. And, there's room to combine this with something else to maybe get a bigger, better response. But again, it's going to take time. And, you should do more research or find multiple sources when you're investing or buying into stocks, and don't be afraid to be wrong or, change your mind if something happens. Don't cling to companies just because you think, you're like emotionally invested in it, for instance.
And don't buy stocks because people talk about them on the internet. Question the credentials of the people giving you the advice. If I was giving you advice on biotech stocks, that wouldn't make any sense. When I give you advice on entertainment or technology or retail or communications, those are fields I've been covering for 10, 20 years in some cases, which I guess ages me compared to Max and Manisha. Manisha, I'm going to give you the last word on the ASH conference. I don't think you have a loser. I think you have a company you want to talk about that you'll call it maybe an I wish it did better, if I'm remembering correctly.
Sure. So I am going to talk about Intelia, another CRISPR gene editing based company. They presented and just nothing happened. I think this is kind of a sleeper stock because they're not in the clinic yet. Or actually, they have 1 asset in the clinic for TTR amyloidosis, but they didn't make quite a splash, not as much as CRISPR Therapeutics. So a lot of times when people talk about CRISPR Therapeutics, they talk about Intelia. Intelia submitted an abstract, they presented, just nothing incrementally. But I think this is one of those stocks where they're kind of behind the scenes, their R&D is working slowly. But I think once they do get out and start human trials, they just started recently, we should be on the lookout for them. But we'll see what happens. The abstract was just not that interesting, but it is an area where we should be looking at. I think gene editing as a technology is really kind of where the future of therapeutics are going. So even with CAR T or even CAR NK cells, they're using some sort of gene editing. So these are gene editing pure plays. So I just wish they had better data. They just didn't.
Manisha, is gene editing a case where there'll be multiple winners, or could somebody, could CRISPR turn out to just be better than everybody else and it crushes all the sort of decent ones?
I think yes, you can have multiple winners. So we have three public CRISPR-based companies, and then we have Beam Therapeutics, which is a derivative of CRISPR. And I think as time goes on, I wouldn't be surprised that we have maybe CRISPR 2.0. And we're seeing that happen just synthetically in editing genes. So I think you have winners for now, and people who have IP around gene editing, those are the true winners. But that can very quickly change. It's a very fast, innovative, dynamic area that is changing.
Thank you, Manisha. Thank you, Max. So we're getting pretty close to our finisher, but before we do that, I want to remind everyone we're doing something really special on Friday. On the Friday edition of 7 Investing Now, we're going to have all 7 of us. And what are we going to do? We're going to take your questions. We already have a lot of questions in the queue, in the document for the show, and we're going to take some live as well. But if you want to get a question to us that we'll try to answer on the show, hit us up at 7 Investing, or you see, our Twitters next to our name. You can hit us up on any of those, or send us your question at info@7investing.com. Sam Bailey, it is now time to hit our finisher. This is an absolutely silly one. Which limited time offer has done the most to drive brand business? This was actually pretty close. The Starbucks PSL, that's the pumpkin spice latte, that won at 38.2%. I actually thought that was going to run away with it simply because every year there's a news story. When's it getting released? What's happening? The McDonald's McRib, that's a different type of limited time offer. What they do is they dot that around the country and people follow it, and it's sort of more under the radar. Taco Bell nacho fries didn't do so well, 7.8%. And Chipotle carne asada. Chipotle very new to the limited time offer game. Let me throw this to Max first. Max, have you ever tried any of these?
No, I haven't, but I'm not too surprised about Taco Bell, right? That's probably my favorite one out of those 4 restaurants. You can call them restaurants, I guess. But
Max, you're picking Taco Bell over Chipotle? Is this I could send you money. Is this a money thing?
Dan, a grande meal. You get like 30 tacos. You feel terrible about yourself afterwards. It's a great experiment. But, you go to Taco Bell like maybe a couple times a year, right? And every time I go there, the whole menu seems like it's different. So it's like their whole menu's promotional. So I'm not surprised that nacho fries got, 8%? So.
That one of our colleagues at the place we used to work, my friend Emily Flippin, was despondent when they canceled or took out Mexican pizza off the menu. And I sort of pointed out, they still have all those ingredients. They'll probably make you one if you ask. Manisha, Samy, are you a pumpkin spice latte person? Have you tried any of these products?
I can't say I have. I actually don't remember the last time I went to Starbucks or McDonald's or Taco Bell.
Okay. I'm on a television show here.
I'm the wrong person to ask.
I'm on a television show here with 2 millennials who are like the least trendy millennials imaginable. I've had the carne asada. It's good. I don't go to Taco Bell. I am not approaching a McRib. It has like fake rib marks. And I'm not a pumpkin spice person, but I will argue the creme brulee latte, which is available now, is underrated. I get one a year. I've already had my one. It's really a lot of calories, but it is very good. I wanted to end on a sillier note because we had such a serious show, but I hope you all enjoyed this. So that brings us to the end of this episode of 7 Investing Now. As we mentioned a second ago, if you have questions for us, send an email to info@7investing.com or reach out to @7investing on Twitter. For Max and Manisha, I'm Dan Kline. Remember to join us Friday. We're all going to be here. We're going to have to get more boxes in our little field of boxes when we're all appearing on the screen together. Friday, noon. We'll see you then.